President Donald Trump says, basically speaking, that the United States negotiated a, quote, total reset with China during trade talks. A total reset. Let that sink in. XRP. Well, some other key things, right? But in the announcement from President Trump, he says a very good meeting, at least then, with China and Switzerland. Many things discussed, much agreed to a total reset. And of course, like it also mentions, negotiated in a friendly but constructive manner. We want to see for the good of both China and the United States an opening up of China to American business. Great progress to be made. Even from CMC, you see earlier today that they had this announcement from Satoshi Club breaking the United States will temporarily cut tariffs on Chinese goods to 30% from 145% for 90 days. China will lower tariffs on U.S. goods from 10% to 125%, I should say, over the same period. BTC is trading over 105K, and it's been kind of fluctuating from 104 to 105. So I take you further into this, and why we're paying attention to this is because I want to point out the key things when we talk about all of the lingo. Enter in Gilbert Verdian with his recent announcement. Now, again, why point some of this out?
If managing your crypto feels like solving a puzzle, it's time to switch to Decent Wallet. It's just a few taps. You can manage, track, and secure your crypto with unmatched ease. And here's the best part. Grab your Decent Wallet at a discounted price by using the referral link below. Don't miss out on making your crypto experience smoother and more secure.
Well, he says specifically programmable pounds, check. Programmable euros, check. Programmable dollars, is what's going to be next. Now, of course, critics will say absolutely not. We're not going to have programmable money here in the United States. Actually, are you sure about that? Are you willing to make a bet that that is a certain thing? Because when I show you some evidence a little bit later, even in Congress, with certain House resolutions, bills being introduced, you might want to reevaluate that particular statement. Now, of course, we understand that Elizabeth Warren basically was going bat-ish crazy lately when it came to the whole thing of some of these bills not getting passed, but let's get further into this and why it matters. So pull this up. I want to get to this next thing because, again, even when you go back to this statement of seeing what Gilbert Verdian posted in regard to programmable dollars next, and again, he posted that May 7th, just a few days ago, brings us back to this, and this time, President Trump. He says the idea that the BRICS countries are trying to move away from the dollar while we stand by and watch is over. We require a commitment from these countries that they will neither create a new BRICS currency nor back any other currency to replace the mighty US dollar, or they will face 100% tariffs and should expect to say goodbye to selling into the wonderful United States economy. They can go find another, quote, sucker. There is no chance that the BRICS will replace the US dollar in international trade, and any country that tries should wave goodbye to America. Now, granted, this is when he was still technically president-elect, but it's still worthy of a mention, November 30th. All right, follow me on this timeline to the now. Gilbert Verdian reposted this. It says, in today's dynamic economy, agility is crucial. Businesses are navigating complex markets, managing multiple currencies, and also basically facing stringent regulatory requirements. Consequently, current payment systems are failing to keep pace with regulatory requirements. Consequently, current pay systems are failing to keep pace with innovation. This is where programmability comes in. Discover why programmable payments present a transformative opportunity for financial transactions, of course, in that particular article. Now, I'm going to play this. It doesn't really share anything in regard to sound or music, but even on this, what stood out for me is this quote. And in the quote from Mark Hargreaves from the Quant Network, I wanted to point this out to you because he mentions automation. And we know that when it comes to Quant Flow, well, they have a key thing that they're sharing in regard to their new product. That new product is referred to as literally Quant Flow. Interesting to see the statement that he makes here of automation brings benefits to consumers and businesses alike, streamlining routine payments, minimizing manual effort, and offering better financial control. What kind of control? What kind of release of that control? So they pull further more into this and the gatherings, brought me over to this from the Quant Network. A lot of times people don't go into all the nitty gritty about this, and it's basically quant.network/associations. I promise you, we'll tie in so many things regard to the Swift update, ISO, XRPs, you name it. But it's the associations. At quant.network/associations, it mentions specifically about they are members of various associations worldwide. They're working towards the future of money. And with that also said, it's interesting to see the highlight, because the highlight shows E-Engine. If you're not aware of it, Engine is the new name for Velocity, the fintech hub launched by the United Kingdom's Investment Association, IA, back in 2018. They, of course, work with 140 plus fintech firms and partners in the investment value chain. But the bottom line is Engine connects best-in-class fintech innovators like Quant to forward-looking investment managers. So this key term about investment managers, even when I get to like the ZBCN coverage later on in this live session, you're going to see why the term of investment managers is so crucial. So take you over to this. This is how we tie in the big things that are going on in the background. Because from a newly mentioned article from the iaengine.com, well, it highlights Orbit launches free AI-powered trade tariff monitor for investment professionals navigating global market shifts. Now, again, I don't know if you're talking to your broskies and your sisters in the community, which is awesome. But this part, this is how we tied in everything from the beginning of this outline. So if anything, lock and load, pay close attention because you might miss it. With that also said, I want to share why I'm sharing this with you. And basically speaking, this was mentioned towards the end of last month, but it pounds home everything that's going on in the world. April 17th, 2025. Orbit launches, of course, that free AI-powered trade tariff monitor, but it's the innovative platform. Who is part of this innovative platform for all this when it comes to tariffs, keeping tabs on companies and countries in real time, critical intelligence, like it says at the bottom, unprecedented trade policy shifts. And I was talking about not the flip of the switch, but the shift of the switch. Orbit, leading AI provider of financial data analysis automation, again, automation, announced the launch of Orbit Trade Tariff Monitor. And again, I think this is all worth getting into because when you see that the platform utilizes Orbit's advanced AI tech to analyze news, filings, and transcripts, well, this is over 150,000 plus companies. That is nothing to bat your eye at. In over 80 countries, providing real-time assessment of how trade tensions affect business operations and market performance. All right, that's incredibly interesting. So I take you further down this rabbit hole, if you want to call it. I saw this again from, of course, this particular site. And the site is actually an X post from Max Avery. Shout out to Michael Cornell once again, because this is from May 8th. The XDC network just signed, if you're not aware with it, the whole MiCA crypto alliance. And this adds this experience to Europe's push for a clear regulatory framework. It's a thread that's worth getting into because when you see xinfin XDC tag there, and you see Hedera and Ripple, and even Aptos, you kind of have an idea of how it all comes together. I will read some of these key things because he goes on to mention that there is what's referred to as confusion between companies and regulators can leads to basically mistrust, mixed signals, whole lot of missed opportunities, and what the MiCA Crypto Alliance aims to solve. Now, I'll point this out. Didn't do that well, and that's okay. Stablecoin discussion, sometimes people find it incredibly boring. But for the hardcore enthusiasts, they realize it's not a boring topic at all because you are talking about some of the biggest players in the biggest space. Where I'm going with that is Recently, I did a collaboration with the one and only Rue Black at Black Rue. Give him a follow on his channel. We discuss a hypothetical scenario about, for example, Ripple purchasing at some point Tether. Now, some people say pump the brakes on that, Max. You know, just because they're trying to potentially go for USDC doesn't mean that will happen. Correct. And I get where you're coming from. There's a code word at the end, which I call the third step, but that would allow them to not only monopolize the stablecoin market. Oh man, I mean, it would be game changer because we know when it comes to USDC alone, that's 28% of the overall stablecoin market. Let's get further into this. If you think about MiCA in itself, and if you studied MiCA, you will come to the conclusion that that would be game changer even for Tether and all the doubters who say that's the next black swan event. Ripple could get that job done for them, especially if they could somehow get that deal done for the future. And I know it's highly speculative, but there's a lot of things that were speculation that came into fruition. As I pull up more about this and want to bring it to you, I want to pull up more about the whole topic of what you're seeing here. So on part 3 of 13, it says with founding members Hedera, Ripple, and Aptos, this group pulls together top crypto names to build practical standards around Europe's new rules. Without that kind of teamwork, every company is basically on its own, creating bloated legal processes, trying to work out how rules apply. It's messy and it's holding the whole space back. Now, you may be wondering, why am I reading all this verbatim? He hits every single point that's worth being shared. The Alliance is focused on solving 4 major pain points: lack of coordination, knowledge, gaps, unclear guidance, and the high cost of staying compliant. Pooling resources helps everyone work smarter, not just harder. XDC Network brings something pretty rare, a blockchain setup that's open and transparent. For example, public networks also gives businesses the control and privacy they usually need. XDC's focus on real areas like global trade, cross-border payments, and tokenizing real-world assets. These are highly regulated fields where getting it wrong can be, of course, very expensive. And this part, I'm going to go further down actually, is this. It says the past decade of legal uncertainty has caused lots of problems for that industry or the industry in a whole. And that kind of fallout has kept a lot of people from getting involved in crypto. I couldn't agree more. But by teaming up for groups like this, companies can help shape rules that actually work for users, investors, and innovators as a smart long-term play. With XDC joining in, the group gains a partner that's already doing the tough work of making a blockchain viable in regulated industries like finance and global trade. 2 more points to get into before we share a little bit more. Europe could stand to gain significant market share of the crypto industry if sensible regulations are put in place, or it could push innovation away if the rules go too far. Collaborations like this one help strike the right balance. And of course, what it says on the bottom, XDC's move sends a clear message. Forward-thinking companies aren't running from regulation, but rather they are stepping in to help shape it by helping draft the rules that will define how blockchain works in the real economy. Combine that with standards like the ISO TC 307 standard, which basically makes it so that's the foundation for building on blockchain. Combine this all together and you have a ship that hasn't sailed, but when it does sail, watch out. As we get further into this, April 3rd, 2025, enter in Calimere Point, because this again comes from the AI engine. Remember how we talked about formerly known as Velocity? So Calimere Point enhances analytics as a service platform. Think about that for a second. With quantum-resistant security, delivering unmatched analytics protection. If you're paying close attention to this, this might be one of the biggest outlines I've ever covered, and you're not even aware of what's going on in the background. I say that politely. I don't mean to ruffle any feathers here, but it's a terminology. This highlight of defense to data, military-grade quantum security democratizes advanced analytics for businesses of all sizes. I did a recent outline with Channing Harrell. By the way, follow him, right, at King Channing. We discussed recently the whole thing of integration. But what's important is In the discovery, you have for the first time an example of a company, and their name, by the way, is called Whippy, like whip up integration. The point is, in the visuals, you see real people with real businesses talk about the automation. Then we show with evidence and research Quant Network, Hedera, with what? AI agents. Combine that with, for example, with Quant Flow, the new product that's not just Overledger, right? We have Overledger and Quant Flow. You can see how this all comes together. Let's get back to why this is important. So when you see the terms of military-grade quantum security, I mean, for me, you think of things like Constellation Day. I think of, for example, Hedera, and even Quant for that matter. But from defense to data, having this be democratized for analytics for all businesses of all sizes, again, check out that video. The technology will be implemented in compliance with the DoD and Autonomous System Air Interoperability Profile, RAS-AIOP, under the Blue UAS program. Now that sounds pretty major, does it not? We're going to get more into this. It says here, HBAR itself, as in Hedera, was created by two of the most respected scientists at the United States Air Force. And of course, when we talk about the Air Force plug in defense, of course, people will think of Constellation Day, but this quote, in my opinion, pounds home everything. And here it is. As security threats evolve, professional drones used by public agencies, law enforcement, and military require advanced cryptographic protection to ensure secure communications, data integrity, and operational resilience. SEAL SQ has established itself as a long-term security provider for the drone industry, offering trusted identity management and end-to-end encryption for drones deployed in high-stakes environments. And of course, you see here, Department of Defense, SpaceX, you get the gist. Now, this, of course, was posted February 14th, but a lot of people already seen this. But again, if you're new, you're going to see how this all comes into fruition. Again, a little bit more into this before we take a break and kick into the comments and some other key things. I want to also point this out because I did mention Constellation Day. Few have ever taken 15 minutes of research, reading to know what's unique, of course, about DAG. How, for close to 6 years, they have been competing for and winning United States government contracts. Unique architecture combined with incredibly low fee structure, all running on multiple layers and quantum-proof security, unlimited, for example, capacity combined with increasing speed. It's the project you need to quit swiping past. Well, teach his own, right? Some of you guys don't hold this, and that's okay. But again, when you see some of the robust connections, you can see how it all comes together, even with what? Their global layer 0, right? We're not just talking about Polkadot here, okay? Nothing against Polkadot. But again, you see how it all comes together. I like the concept of mind maps. It's not really a mind map, but even you see side at the bottom, Oracle. We know about Oracle's infrastructure and that partnership with Quant. We know about Oracle with JP Morgan. Then when you get further into the next page, you see, for example, Department of Government Efficiency. Would these technologies be used at a federal level? I think the answer is yes. And even though it's blurry here, again, I didn't take this picture, you see how it's all orchestrated. Federal Reserve, kicking it down to Treasury Department, United States Department of Education, and even with the SEC. Take to the last part, you see the partner ecosystem. Yes, with Constellation, Microsoft, IBM, NASA, Homeland Security, you name it. Big, big deal to say the least. Now, here's something that, in my opinion, might be very well, as I would like to point out, the smoking gun, okay? So, shout out to this person, Florence of Arabia, okay? She points out this, and I think it's very important to get into it just briefly, because obviously we're talking about this ISO update. She states, in order for ISO assets to start moving in value, precious metals should undergo reevaluation. For example, XRP, XLM, XCC are white hats military blockchains. Now you may be like, I don't know the reference of what you're talking about here. Well, I'll blow it up for you just in case you're one of those people who are like, I don't know. Sounds too speculative to me. So in the documentation, where I will show you where this kind of linked to or came from. It says here in this, in order for rainbow coins, this is interesting because it says, for example, quantum financial system. So in order for rainbow coins, bonds, or ISO 222 assets to start moving in value, physical precious metals must first undergo a reassessment. Once the new assessment is defined, the weight of compliance with Basel III plus Bretton Woods III will bring legitimacy to everything else. Triggering, some people say the trigger in itself is the flip of the switch or pulling the trigger, call it whatever you want, right? Triggering ISO 222 regulation. So we're talking about mandates. Well, mandates, you have to have regulation before. And I think that's the key driver, for example, for August, or I should say July, and of course, with what Trump is potentially going to do in August. So it says gold standard asset-backed currencies, physical and digital assets. Mentions, for example, some of these about CBDCs. But again, right below that says digital assets backed by precious metals, gold, silver, copper, platinum, etc., etc. Then rainbow coin, treasure, rainbow banknotes tracked, instant digital payments via QFS, quantum financial system. Then the part below, it kind of sounds like doom and gloom, right? Death in dollar, pound, and so on. That part about death in dollar, pound, and euro, I am going to address that because some people are like, geez, this sounds scary. Well, I decided to use that lens, and when I used that lens, it forwarded me over to this. And it's shout out to David Krause. He is an emeritus professor over at the finance department of Marquette University. And he wrote this abstract about regulatory recalibration, U.S. banking agencies shift towards crypto integration. Again, Will Fix and I talked about this. Shani Harrell and I talked about this. It's called the shift of the switch. This is page 1 of 10. But again, just in case you were not aware of it, an emeritus professor is a retired professor who maintains an honorary title with their former university recognizing significant contributions and achievements. All right, so this guy's sharing some key things, and some of his key writing recently, as of May 8th, got shared over on the CLS Blue Sky blog. That's with Columbia Law School, by the way, and that law school has a blog on corporations and the capital markets. How many times do we talk about capital markets ecosystems? Now, one thing I want to point out is this. He mentioned specifically this highlight. While not a wholesale embrace of the crypto ecosystem, the coordinated action marked a notable recalibration of supervisory posture, opening new pathways for innovation in financial services. Think about that for a second. As we get further into it, well, remember how we talked about what would happen with Congress? Hopefully this is big enough for you guys. It says here specifically, and actually I'll just, I'll keep it there, otherwise I'm going to lose my mark. So just follow with me. It says from the United States Congress, they are considering design considerations. I know, sounds scary. It says a CBDC would allow holders to store value, make payments digitally, and would be backed by the Fed, as in the case for physical currency. This part, I'm not going to read like all 100 pages of this. I will just read this paragraph, so bear with me. It says, but other features are unresolved. Crypto generally records transfers on public, decentralized, or distributed ledgers, stored using blockchain tech. Often, individual accounts are protected using cryptography or for the reasons of, what you see here. But for background, there's this link to cryptocurrency selected policy issues, but it states it is unclear which of these features would be desirable in a CBDC or whether a CBDC might be built upon existing payment systems instead. Built upon. If you think about it, the overledger is literally what? Something that's built upon existing blockchains. It's blockchain agnostic. So this part says from end to end, or I should say from end user perspective, CBDC proposals range from a payment system similar to the status quo to one that is fundamentally different. At one end of the spectrum of proposals, a CBDC accessible only to banks may differ only slightly from the current system, given that wholesale payment systems already digital. At the other end, proposals for consumers to be able to hold CBDCs in accounts at the Fed would fundamentally change the role of the Fed and its relationship with consumers and banks. The Fed's report envisioned a middle ground where end users would access CBDC and related services through financial institutions. Thus, depending on its attributes, a domestic CBDC could potentially compete with crypto, notably stablecoins, foreign CBDCs, private payment platforms, or banks. CBDC proponents differ as to which of these they would like it to compete with. Think about that for a moment. CBDCs are more likely to compete with crypto as a payment means for legal commerce than their other current uses. For example, the speculative investments or as payment means for illicit activities. Now, I decided to jump to this bottom part because there is issues for Congress in that regard. And here it basically is somewhat highlighted in gray. CBDC's initiatives in other countries could have implications for the United States. For example, some members of Congress have expressed concerns that if a major central bank successfully develops a CBDC that can be used for cross-border transactions, the use of the US dollar globally could decline, challenging the status of the US dollar as the world's dominant reserve currency and potentially make it easier to skirt US financial sanctions. Again, why point out any of this? Just in case you didn't or you missed it, the reason why I point this out is back to this. Because for Gilbert Verdian to post this just a few days ago, I think it pounds home the whole understanding of where the United States is positioned right now. Keep that also in mind that Gilbert Verdian, as we know, still sits, apparently speaking, according to his resume, maybe this needs to be updated, that he is still part of the Federal Reserve as a chair, giving his own advice and so on. And he's been there, since 2017, 2018 in regard to, the task force, the Fed chair, Federal Reserve Task Force and so on. So I think he still has that plug, to say the least, when it comes to the United States. There's more about this before we kick it into wrapping this up, because when we get into the next part, well, even as we speak, from House Resolution 1919, you see here the whole thing of an Anti-CBDC Surveillance State Act. That's from the 119th Congress. It's going from 2025 to 2026. But Representative Tom Emmer, Republican from Minnesota, mentioned this, or introduced this, I should say, all the way back in March of this year. But again, this was introduced. And, of course, the last update was placed on the Union calendar on May 6th. So this will be interesting to follow this and see what happens in regard to it all. Now, before we finish everything, because I know this is quite the deep dive, right? And I do appreciate you guys following this, because this is what I do. It says, we've unleashed the greatest asset, their data. Now, if you've been following closely about this is why we're pointing this out. This is from CalimerePoint.com. Calimere Point, I don't know, tomato. But it's who they're connected to. So trusted by clients to deliver data analytics and data visualization. You better believe you recognize all of these companies for the most part. How many times do you see them mentioned with your Ripple XRPs, all the big players, right? JP Morgan, LSEG, El Centra, Deutsche Bank, HSBC, Royal Bank of Scotland, BNY Mellon, on and on and on and on and on and on. Well, here's where I love using some AI. Some of you guys don't like me using AI, but it's a helpful tool. I'm going to give you a summary of the connections without making this another hour or two. The confirmed connection is World Vision. That wasn't necessarily shown on the previous page, but it's there. They use Stellar for transparent aid distribution. There's possible connections, speculative, but no direct evidence, as we know of HSBC, Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, so on and so forth, for their blockchain initiatives like Corda, Onyx, Finality, Hyperledger could align with Quant Network, Hedera, or Algorand. This other one of LME and OLAM, their supply blockchain efforts could intersect with Hedera and Algorand. Again, I understand it's all speculative, but what I think is important here is, like it says, there's this consortium-based DLTs. Even with Corda, we know with XRP and XDC that those are like pretty much settlement tokens, especially XDC, right? And then recent discoveries, even with Smoke's research, we found out we have to include XRP in that. As I take you further into this and why it matters, if you go to Calimere Point, I'm just going to call it Calimere Point, it's so much easier to say, .com/AI-machine-learning, it points out this. It says those organizations that can harness the power of this technology will be at the forefront of this revolution. Calimere Point can help empower your organization to embrace the future. So you may be wondering about all this stuff. Like, I don't really understand the real connection. Again, I think that this is big, and to have Quant Network connected with these guys, I think speaks volumes because, like it says, harness your data, understand your data, trust your data, leverage your data. The whole point of Overledger in itself is to do what? Is to leverage the existing tech of all these particular projects built on so many different blockchains and so on. But if we're going to harness that data, then how do we harness that data through things like Quant Flow? As I pull up more about this, I like what's mentioned here because, again, getting more into it, when we talk about, for example, Calimere Point, well, even Grok agrees that interoperable data sharing would be across financial ecosystems. Through what? Interoperability. You would need something that's blockchain agnostic. But Calimere Point could very well use Overledger to connect financial institutions, private DLTs for trade finance and security settlement. Back to everything you saw recently in regard to what Trump mentioned and everything you recently saw in regard to all the recent announcements. Because with public blockchains or legacy databases, Overledger's APIs create gateways that would secure, standardize, and create a mechanism to exchange across multiple systems, ensuring real-time access for consistent data. And here's an example. Calimere Point, for example, could facilitate a client's ability to aggregate market data from multiple blockchain-based platforms. Does that not match up with the gentleman that was doing that whole thread about XDC? I think the answer is yes. So you have your traditional systems, and that would improve, I should say, analytics for portfolio optimization. Now, here's another thing I want to point out. Tokenized assets and analytics. Overledger, as we know, allows the issuance and management of digital assets across multiple blockchains, such as tokenized bonds and equities. Calimere Point could leverage Overledger to track and analyze these assets' performance across networks, providing clients with insights into the market trends, liquidity, or risk exposure. This could involve deploying Overledger smart tokens, which are QRC, right? We know that those are basically QRC20, right? To create interoperable financial instruments using Quant Connect to monitor their behavior without needing deep blockchain coding experience or expertise. Yes, that's the answer. That's why it's so important to recognize their inbuilt platform tools, because they are already built with those templates to be no code, if you will, or if your developer 3 lines of code. All right, before, again, we just totally wrap it up. If you ever wonder about some of this stuff, Engine back in 2019 shared a snapshot of Orbit sentiment. The only time they mentioned anything about Quant, but it's not the Quant you're thinking of, okay? I wish it was Quant Network, but still, I think the terminology is interesting. It says, white box solution back in 2019 extracts alpha out of real-time news. Well, who's currently doing some of this stuff with Quant Flow, with automation, right? So they cite Quant Lab. Quant Lab's been around for a long time. That is not the Quant Network you're thinking of, right? But what is interesting here is machine learning, unstructured data, and so on. To me, this ages incredibly well because it's how this all came into fruition. Now, here's one of the main moments you've been waiting for. You said that there would be an update from Swift. There is. Swift mentions what happens when coexistence ends. We know that when it comes to MT messaging and MX, because MX is ISO 222, that coexistence period, it ends as far as coexistence. So the end of coexistence period approaches, excuse me, hold on a second here. Had to clear my throat. Didn't want to create into a Crypto Hulk moment. No offense to Crypto Hulk.
Don't copy what I do.
Anyway, as the end of coexistence approaches, the community is gearing up for a significant milestone, of course, in this journey. To ensure business continuity during this transaction, they deploy selected short-term contingency measures to help institutions finalize their migrations. All right, so this is interesting. It's this terminology, inflow translation service. Think about that for a moment. Inflow translation service. This service will remain available after the 22nd of November 2025, but will become chargeable for payment instructions. Okay, that's interesting, because even with that, it's like, I decided to ask Grok. I said, all right, Grok, with that said, would there be an overlap with Quant's Overledger or Quant Flow? Well, Grok kind of agrees. They say, for example, for financial institutions heavily reliant on Swift's network, Quant Flow could complement Swift's inflow translation service by providing additional interoperability with non-Swift systems. And think about that for a minute. Domestic real-time gross settlements, or DLT networks, for example, an FI could use Swift service for CBPR plus messages in Quant Flow to integrate ISO 222 compliant payments with blockchain-based CBDC platform. CBDC platform. So for one, it's kind of like Gilbert Verdian's giving us little nuggets. Right? You can't come out and say it. But to me, if you take the deeper dive, which we are, come on. Have you not been paying attention? I think you are. I think literally, if you wrap your mind around it, the writing's on the wall. Look at this. They do mention how Quant Flow could also compete with Swift service for FIs seeking a single vendor agnostic. Geez, isn't Quant blockchain agnostic? Isn't their wallet with overwallet wallet agnostic? My goodness. So vendor agnostic solution to handle payment modernization needs, especially if they operate across multiple networks. So Quant could also compete with Swift. Are you not bullish enough on Quant? Wow. All right, that's incredibly interesting. All right, the next part I want to get into is this bottom part, and this is the conclusion. Quant Network's Quant Flow does include functionality akin to an inflow translation service as referenced by Swift, in that it can translate legacy payment messages, for example, MT, to ISO 222 formats and enrich data to ensure compliance and interoperability. However, Quant Flow is not merely a translation service. It's kind of like it's Billy Mays here. But wait, we have more. It is a broader, more versatile platform. Are you kidding me? Broader and more versatile. Wow. As you guys would say, and trying to get hyped, let's go, right? That supports interoperability across Swift, domestic real-time gross settlements, distributed ledger technologies, and emerging digital finance use cases like CBDCs and instant payments. Say what you want. There's a problem that exists with the United States not getting board with the digital dollar. I think, if anything, you can see the writing on the wall. Quant Network is the solution. Tab it more. While Swift's inflow translation service is a Swift-specific transition tool focused on CBBR Plus and the November 2025 deadline, Quant Flow is a strategic, I just love the terminology, Grok even loves Quant apparently, vendor-agnostic solution designed for long-term payments modernization. Thus, my goodness, Quant Flow can be considered an inflow translation service. You saw it here first, everybody. Boil it, mash it, stick it in a stew. In the context of ISO 222 adoption, but it goes beyond Swift service and scope, flexibility, and application. For financial institutions deciding between the two, the choice depends on the reliance on Swift's network versus their need for multi-network future-proof solution. I'll come back in the frame to wrap this up completely, I should say, because I know there's a lot to take in. Here's the bottom line. We know about the test pilots. We know about the regulated liability network. Been there and done that. We know about all the participants for the most part. You may be new to all this. We also know about the regulated settlement network, RSN. So we know the Ripple plug to that. We know the Stellar plug to that, your Hedera's and so on. But say what you want to be at the forefront, to be a legitimate competitor to Swift. People state that Ripple replaced Swift. Yes, I think so. Swift is upgrading to ISO 222. They introduced ISO 222 in 2004. Ironically, the same year that Ripple technically formed, right? You know, had an old name back then. But whatever the case be, we can see, if anything, by taking the deep dive, the research, which we just did, and how it all comes together. This is why Quant Network is consistently my number one, and XRP is consistently also tied for my number one. I have Stellar right after, and so on. Believe it or not, I have Jasmine at number 3, and we're going to get some Jasmine news here in a bit. But I wanted to bring this to you guys. I know it was quite the deep dive, And again, if you're brand new, hopefully I've earned your like. If you're regular, take the jump. Consider being a subscriber. I more than appreciate you guys